Don't forget about these two down roster wideouts ahead of Dallas Cowboys training camp. We will tell you who they are in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. And on today's show, we are answering your Twitter questions. And we've got some really good ones about, could the Cowboys potentially trade Cooper Rush? Is it hard for CeeDee Lamb and Micah Parsons to be good leaders when they're not practicing with the team? But let's start with this first one from John. He wants to know, who is your favorite down roster player that could crack the 53-man roster for the Cowboys?
This was a tough one, tougher than trying to say the phrase "down roster wideout." It's but look, there are a bunch of names on here, right? That could be sleepers, and we can argue the semantics of that, because I think there's a lot of guys that we talk about that are borderline roster guys, like guys that are that are definitely in contention or are likely to make the roster, but are certainly not guaranteed a roster spot.
I was looking at like the down roster offensive linemen, like between Matt Waletzko and Earl Bostick and Dakota Shepley. Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of names. Like, you could tell me any of those guys make the roster, and I would believe you.
And honestly, we've also talked a lot about those guys, and I think so. I think this was a good opportunity for us to kind of talk about some folks that fit the bill of what the question is, but also some folks that we don't speak a lot about. And I think the first guy I want to talk about is Tyron Billy Johnson, who is a guy who I'm sure it's completely random mentioning his name because we haven't heard his name very much, but we have heard his name kind of whispered in the wind a little bit from players. I hear other players talk about him from coaches randomly. He's a guy that came out of Oklahoma State. He's 6'1", 193 pounds. He was on the team last year, and kind of did the whole practice squad, free agent signing, being released situation. He got injured at a certain point. I can't remember when, but basically was not really a guy that was in really shooting range of making the roster last year, but he hung around, right? He was part of the team. He made it through the offseason. He worked with these guys. So clearly the Cowboys liked him a lot. And you're starting to hear, as we get on closer and closer to OTAs, I've heard his name mentioned a couple times, but he's a really intriguing guy because he's a guy that's got really great speed. He was a guy that, in that group of wide receivers who kind of made a splash at OTAs last year, including the John Stevens of the world and the David Durden's, like those guys. Like, he was one of those guys who was also kind of, every once in a while you're seeing, like, who is this guy with the weird, hyphen name that is his name? He's got two first names. It's like, Tyron Billy Johnson. It's like, and for a while, I thought his first name was Billy. I could not get my brain past it. I thought it was Billy Johnson, but he was a guy who just kind of kept on like popping a little bit in training camp. He was often going against some of the down roster guys, but then as training camp kind of developed, you saw him, going, he got some work with the ones, because they always work in these guys just to see, and he didn't, back down. So he's an interesting guy. He's getting older. He's getting a little bit older in age. And I think that's why, this is probably his last real shot, honestly. Because I think he's going to be 20. I think he's 27. He may be 28.
He's 28. Yeah. He just turned 28.
So, he's a guy that I think, has some maturity. He's got decent size. He's got really good speed, and clearly is in a situation where, this is probably the end of the line for him at this point. And I think he's, and he's going to try to have to make the most of it. And the fact that we're hearing his name kind of, whispered, not a drumbeat situation yet, but just whispered, I think that's, a good sign for a guy that, has managed to hang around this whole time, despite some stiff competition.
Yeah, I got to cover him a couple of years with the Raiders, and he was on and off the roster. I can't even tell you how many times he bounced on the 53-man roster back down to the practice squad. I mean, his speed is outrageous. I mean,
Yeah.
he is so ridiculously fast. He ran a 4.36 at his pro day. I'm telling you, that's not even close to how fast he plays. And that's why, despite barely having any production in the NFL and in college, he continues to get shots because he is so fast. And one of the things that I like about him, he does a really good job of tracking the ball down the field. Like, he can go fly down the field, follow the ball in the air, and make plays. The issue is he's just not a complete route runner at all. Now, if he can get to where he can run 3 or 4 other routes at a adequate level, now we're talking. So, I mean, we've been talking for a while now how the Cowboys need to get more speed on offense. If Billy Johnson can beat out, I mean, who Jalen Brooks for the 4th receiver spot, the 5th receiver spot, I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, I mean, look, we really like Jalen Tolbert and Jalen Brooks. We're, those are guys, the Jalen's. Those are guys that we're not like trying to push off the roster necessarily. And I'm, if anything, obviously very excited about Jalen Tolbert. And we've talked about. I'm really, really excited about Jalen Brooks, who I think showed you a ton as a rookie, especially a late round pick. However, if this guy shows out to the level that Jalen Brooks is, I understand that Jalen Brooks was a draft pick, but like the opportunity to add speed like this, that's something that can't be ignored necessarily. And again, it's something that the Cowboys offense needs. So it could make decisions really difficult for these coaches. And, maybe you're able to kind of continue to do the dance with him that he's been doing with his whole career, except with the addendum that maybe he actually gets some actual playing time with the Cowboys, now with the new rules they have with the practice squad and everything.
The Cowboys have had a lot of success with players at the same position with the same first name. I mean, Tyler Guyton, Tyler Smith, Tyler Biadasz, right?
Yeah,
We had Marcus Lawrence, DeMarcus Ware. And now we've got Jalen Brooks, we've got Jalen Tolbert, and the guy that I'm picking is Jalen Cropper, who the Cowboys signed last year as an undrafted free agent. He was one of the guys that Bones Fossil actually mentioned as somebody who could benefit from the new rule changes with the kickoff returns, because you're likely going to want to have 2 returners on the field at the same time. We talked about muscle watch yesterday. Apparently, Jalen Moreno Cropper went from 172 pounds to 215 pounds in one offseason. Pretty impressive. Yeah. I remember talking to Eric Galco last year on this podcast about Cropper and why I liked him so much. He has some inside-outside versatility. He thought that he would make the roster last year. Obviously, that didn't happen, but year 2, same system, somebody that can play in the slot and on the outside and play on special teams. I wouldn't be surprised if this is the year that he cracked the 53-man roster.
Yeah, I mean, I think, he was a guy that we had targeted early last year as an undrafted free agent. The Cowboys clearly have had a ton of success with undrafted free agent wide receivers. I mean, just, finding them. I mean, they don't always become superstars, but they find them and they become valuable role players for this team. And sometimes they go off and sign with teams like Miami or wherever, and it's really been a successful situation for the Cowboys. And now it's almost like they have a glut here. They got all these guys, and Moreno Cropper was the guy that we identified last year as, this guy could be this year's undrafted free agent wide receiver his profile just really fits. Like, he was really successful in college, and just his game seemed to translate, pretty cleanly to an NFL game in the way that you've seen some of these other guys who, the Cowboys have had success kind of getting in and getting reps early with the ones, and then kind of suddenly they're in the preseason, playing next to Dez Bryant, and suddenly this guy's the starting slot receiver, or, I mean, we've seen it a lot of different ways.
Danny Amendola, great example, right?
I mean, Amendola, Beasley. I mean, seriously, the list goes on. Like, Austin, it's like
Miles Austin,
there's tons of these guys. These guys have gotten, either from small schools or just guys who hadn't played a lot of college football that just needed some development at wide receiver. The Cowboys have just had a lot of success here. And Cropper, to me, seemed like a guy that would have success because he didn't really fit into any of those categories. He had played a lot of football. He had played at a decent school, not like not Alabama, not Georgia, but not they're not having bounce houses on the field either. So I think it was, and we've seen a lot of good players come out of that school. So
including Deron Bland.
Yeah, Deron Bland. So it's like, I think that, he was a guy that I was a little bit surprised didn't pop a little bit more in that first training camp. I don't think it's because he's not talented.
No.
A lot of times it's because it's just a lot to take in. I have a lot of hope for him coming up in this next training camp, because I just, when you grow 3 inches and 40 pounds in an off season, I mean, no, but seriously, I think that talent's going to shine through a lot more this year, because I think he's going to be a lot more comfortable.
I think one of those two will make the roster. I think they're both competing for one spot. It'll be fascinating to see who wins that job. This next question we got laid in is a really, really tough one about the leadership of Micah Parsons and CeeDee Lamb. Let's dive into that next. This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It's the formula for winning championships, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Are you having to turn down the volume because of all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, this next question comes from John, and Landon, this is a tough one. He wants to know, Micah Parsons and CeeDee Lamb, after the Packers game, talked about how they wanted to be better leaders, become more vocal leaders. Is it disappointing to not see them at OTAs when they talked about how important leadership is?
I think let's answer the question the way it's asked first. Is it disappointing? It isn't disappointing necessarily, because I think it's expected, because that's kind of the business of the NFL. But to the questioner's point, and I think it's a good point, I do think it is kind of talk it out of both sides of your mouth a little bit, of just saying that you want to be a leader and trying to, promote leadership. And then, this is obviously a business decision, and but it's also a point where young players need help and need support, and they need to kind of know who the leaders of this team, and bonds are being formed between the veterans and those rookie players. And look, I think everybody understands that it's a business, and no one's going to hold it against Micah and everyone and CeeDee. And I think all the players especially understand what needs to be done for the sake of business, and certainly aren't going to hold someone else, a fellow player, I don't know if the word's accountable, but fault them for that, because everyone's probably going to have to deal with it if you have success in this league. But it is not a great look, and it's unfortunate that the players are kind of being put into this situation where, that they have to hold out or miss these OTAs in order to kind of get their point across. And again, this isn't unique to Dallas. This is something that happens across the league. But I do think that to the larger point, these situations, they do often cut against the idea of leadership and the idea of not showing up. And I will also point out, and I just want to say this, that I don't recognize this, that Dak Prescott is here, and that Dak Prescott is in the middle of maybe a pretty contentious, negotiation himself. So I think there is something to the idea. But I really don't think it's going to be held against them by the players, because again, it's the nature of the NFL. It's just an unfortunate look. And I do agree. I think it sort of does cut in the face of trying to be leaders when you're not here at the OTAs.
All right, I need to almost break this down by player because CeeDee Lamb is playing on his 5th-year option right now. He is in the middle of a contract. I mean, this is a contract negotiation, right?
Yeah.
Like, I get it. And it doesn't sound like he's going to be available or at practice next week for the OTAs. And I would be shocked if he's there for minicamp. So that part of it is hard. Now, Micah, on the other hand, this is what Micah has done the last couple of years is I think he's missed this first week of OTAs. He's off doing other training right now. I think Micah said that he's going to be there at OTAs next week. If not next week.
It sounded like that's what Michael said. Yeah.
If he's not practicing, he'll be there, and he'll be there for mandatory minicamp because he has to be. He's going into the 4th year, the final year of his rookie deal. The Cowboys did exercise his 5th-year option, so technically he's under contract for the 2025 season. He almost has to be there. Like I would get really concerned if he's not there. So even with CeeDee Lamb and Micah Parsons, there's some different dynamics there. I don't really worry about it too much in May, but it's not ideal. I mean, I'd be lying to you if I said it's great. Like, this is awesome. Who cares? Like, leaders aren't born in, April and May, but you kind of are. Like, this is when you establish yourself as, hey, this is my team. It's a little disappointing.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's fair. I think it's not unique for around the league, but that doesn't mean that ultimately it isn't disappointing because you want to see these guys around here, for the other guys, for the younger guys, because again, like, leaders are kind of born in May because these guys don't know any of these other players, right? The rookies, I mean, and they're coming in and they're looking immediately to see who's providing guidance to them, who's the one that's taking the torch and that we're following. And that's a good point as to why Dak is here and probably wouldn't miss this because he understands that this is not just an important part of getting better at executing the schemes and understanding how practice works and all of those things that installing the offense, which is ultimately what they're doing, right? He understands that's all important, but maybe just as important and more important for him specifically is that if you really are the leader of the team, or if you want to be the leader of the team, you have to be there to lead when the players are going to need it the most. And that's rookies when they're practicing for the first time with the vets, when they're confused, when they are embarrassed because they're standing next to professional football players for the first time. They want a strong voice and someone who is there to guide them. And that initial, interaction that sticks with you. And that's how you say, oh, this is my leader because he told me what to do when I didn't know what to do. And if you're not here around the building, it's hard to make that argument. Obviously, CeeDee specifically is a lead by example guy, and I have a feeling that both of those guys are going to have quite good examples to show us during training camp. But again, it's hard. It's hard when you say the words. You're trying to tell us that you want to be a leader, and you're not here at the moment. When that kind of leadership begins, even if it feels like it's an excused absence of some sort.
It's tricky because, I mean, at the same time, last year at training camp, like the day before training camp started, we got news that Zach Martin wasn't going to come, right?
Yeah.
As he was holding out for his deal, right? And Zach Martin, one of the leaders of the team, he just tells you, hey, I'm not showing up to training camp. And he was getting fined every day. I would also mention last year, now that maybe this is how it should be going about for Mike and CeeDee. Trayvon Diggs showed up to, I think, almost every OTA, but he didn't practice, right? He was there, like he was present. He just wasn't practicing until he got a new deal. That's probably the best way to do that, but every situation is different.
And I'll add in that for me, Zach Martin, no one's questioning whether Zach Martin is the leader or not at that point. CeeDee and Micah are elite players in this league, but as far as leaders, like this is very fresh and new to them. Like, you know what I'm saying? As far as transitioning to this role, and these are key steps to be taking that they really shouldn't be missing. There's plenty of time to make up for that. It's going to be fine ultimately, but it's tough when you talk about it yourself. You bring it up. You're telling us that you want to be a leader. Guys, we got to watch your feet, not your mouth. So we got to see action here.
All right. So on yesterday's show, we talked about Trey Lance's improvements, and it seems like the Cowboys are greasing the skids for him to be the number 2 quarterback. Does that mean that they could potentially trade Cooper Rush this offseason? We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Yahoo Finance. When it comes to your financial future, you think you've done it all. You've saved, you've researched, and you've invested all that you can. Now you need to take those investments to the next level by using what every financial great uses, and that's Yahoo Finance. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. Whether you're a seasoned investor or you're looking for some extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and the data you need in one place. They are the number one finance destination, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. With a community with over 90 million users each month, their real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com, the number one financial destination, yahoofinance.com. That is yahoofinance.com. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Our final question here is from Kevin. Is it possible that the Cowboys could trade Cooper Rush this offseason with Trey Lance's improvement?
I think it's possible. I mean, look, I don't know about the offseason, though. I would imagine it more being a situation where they keep him through the start of the regular season, and then if a contender loses a starter, and they don't have a backup that they're confident in. I mean, Cooper Rush is a guy who's come in and won games in this league, a lot of games. I mean, to be honest, as far as a backup quarterback goes, and he could be a guy that, like, if you needed to get through a month of tough football, you just needed a steady hand on the wheel, and let's say Atlanta gets off to a hot streak or something like that, right? And then Kirk Cousins, does something to his knee and he's out for 3 to 4 weeks. I wouldn't be surprised if they weren't quite ready for Penix to come in and take some starts, that maybe they call and see what they could get for Cooper Rush. Or you have another situation. I mean, I can't really
something like that, right? Or I'm thinking like Aaron Rodgers goes down for 4 games. Now he's going to be back for December, but you just need a backup. Maybe you need a backup even behind Tyrod Taylor that can come in and play if things go poorly. That's a situation that I could see playing out. Or maybe, I don't know, Joe Burrow goes down again and you want another backup. So, like, there's a lot of different situations. However, I will say, with the NFL changing the rules about how now you can keep 3 quarterbacks active every game, and one doesn't have to be declared out for the third string quarterback to be able to play. I think that makes it a little bit more palatable to keep 3 quarterbacks. And certainly in a situation like with the Cowboys with Trey Lance, where maybe if Dak goes down for a half, you don't necessarily want Trey Lance to play because you'd rather have Cooper Rush come in. He's going to know the playbook without having to get a bunch of reps during practice in the week. But you would also like to have 2 or 3 plays in a game in a package for Trey Lance, maybe the goal line, short yardage, tush-push stuff. I think it makes it a little bit easier to hold on to Cooper Rush.
Absolutely. That's why I do think that they will hold on to him through into the regular season, because they've just made it too appetizing to keep 3 quarterbacks on your roster. And again, now that you're allowed to kind of use that loophole for a quarterback that you can do kind of tricky stuff with, and that means that Trey Lance is going to be eligible. That's even more of a reason to hold on to 3 of these guys if you want to. And I think if the Cowboys are going to trade Cooper Rush, that's why I don't think it's the offseason, because I don't think first of all, you're not getting good value for a Cooper Rush in the offseason. You want a team that's desperate. You want a team that's going to overpay for Cooper Rush. And that's the only way that I think I would trade away Cooper Rush with these new rules, is that, somebody offers me a 3rd round pick for Cooper Rush, or, I'm not saying no to a 3rd round pick for Cooper Rush, so I think that's the likely scenario where he gets traded.
The other reason why you would trade away Cooper Rush is if you had a younger quarterback on your roster, like as the 4th guy who was just showing out in training camp, or mini camps and OTAs where it's like, okay, this guy's 21 years old and he's playing this well. Let's develop him and see what we have. I don't think they have a third quarterback on the roster right now, right? And a fourth quarterback.
No.
And even if they do,
They had that tryout with that kid that they liked a lot, but they didn't even end up signing him or bringing him back.
It tells you kind of where they're at
right.
with the
Yeah,
quarterback.
exactly where we are. So yeah, I think right now they have those three. I think they keep those three through training camp. And if somebody, makes them an offer they can't refuse, then that's one thing. But I think right now the rules are just made such a way that it's easy to keep three. Might as well.
Let me ask you this before we head out. Who is more likely to be traded during the season? Cooper Rush or Trey Lance?
That's a really good question, honestly.
Because my guess would be Trey Lance.
It might be. Yeah, it might be.
Who maybe they have an early season injury to a quarterback and they're like, okay, hey, we'll flip a 3rd round pick for Trey Lance. And that way we have a young guy with some athleticism who we can develop. And the Cowboys look at it like, hey, we got Trey Lance for a year as a backup when we moved from the bottom of the 4th round to the 3rd round. That's worth our investment.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly again, I think to get one of those quarterbacks out of our hands, it's going to cost you. And I think if you're going to pay, you would pay for a Trey Lance that you saw maybe have a really great preseason and you feel like maybe has got it together. He clearly has a lot of tools. And so maybe that's the trade is all right, look, we got a lot of weapons here, but we also have a hurt quarterback who may be older. Let's take a roll of the dice. Maybe we hit gold with this kid, and if we do, then he's our quarterback of the future, and we only paid a 2nd or 3rd round pick for him. So I think in a world where Trey Lance really shines in the preseason and like gets some teams salivating about the potential of, hey, maybe he's figured it out. Maybe we get him with some playmakers and he can do this. I think that to me is the most likely. To place. I think that's the most likely where teams are going to overpay to the point that you're actually going to execute the trade.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Every day. On Monday's show, we're going to be continuing our burning question series as we get ready for training camp. We're going to look at the offensive line. How much will the offensive line regress this year without Tyron Smith, without Tyler Biadasz, or will they regress at all? We'll debate that and more on that episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosier. Enjoy your holiday weekend, and we will see you right back here on Monday.